Hey, you, Merry Christmas. I hope you are staying warm with something hot in your hands, because what I saw last night had me laughing like crazy. But before we jump into that, let me remind you that Bell with Bounce is not just another channel. It is your space made for you and only you. And even though thousands might be watching right now, they do not exist in this moment, because right now it is just you and me, sitting like we are in my New York living room, talking straight and honest. So do one thing, hit that subscribe button. And no, I am not talking to your relative who believes every weird theory online. I am talking to you because you actually get what we do here. Real talk, real reactions, no pretending. And once you subscribe, you step into the circle that somehow feels exclusive, even if there are thousands in it. Here's what happened, and you need to pay attention because this is really big. The Supreme Court just made a decision that's sending shockwaves across America. Depending on where you stand, you're either celebrating or absolutely terrified. We're talking about birthright citizenship, that thing that's been American law for over 127 years. Trump wants to end it, and now the Supreme Court has agreed to hear the case. The highest court in the land is going to decide whether a president can, with a stroke of a pen, redefine who gets to be an American citizen. Before you think this is just another political squabble, let me paint a picture of what's really at stake. On January 20th, his first day back in office, Trump signed an executive order declaring that children born in the United States to parents who are here illegally or temporarily are not American citizens. Just like that, he tried to overturn more than a century of constitutional understanding. The 14th Amendment, passed after the Civil War to ensure black people, including former slaves, had citizenship, says clearly that all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens. It's right there in black and white. But Trump's administration argues that subject to the jurisdiction thereof means something different than what we've understood for generations. Think about what this means. We're talking about babies. Innocent kids who had no choice in where they were born or who their parents are. Under Trump's order, if it takes effect, these children would be born on American soil but wouldn't be American citizens. They'd be stateless, in legal limbo. According to experts, this could affect roughly 100,000 children every single year. That's a lot of kids whose entire futures hang in the balance, while 9 justices decide their fate. Here's where it gets interesting, and by interesting I mean absolutely wild. Every single lower court that has examined this executive order has said the same thing. It's unconstitutional. Federal judges in Seattle, Maryland, and New Hampshire all blocked the order. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals agreed. Even Trump-friendly courts couldn't make this stick. So what did Trump do? He went straight to the Supreme Court, which agreed last Friday to take up the case. Oral arguments are expected between February and April, with a final ruling by the end of June. Let me tell you about this Supreme Court. It's got a 6-3 conservative majority. 3 justices were appointed by Trump himself. You'd think he's got a good shot, right? Not so fast. Even legal scholars on the right are scratching their heads because the 14th Amendment's language isn't ambiguous. It doesn't say some persons or persons born to American citizens. It says all persons. It's been interpreted that way since 1898, when the Supreme Court ruled in United States versus Wong Kim Ark that a child born in California to Chinese parents was an American citizen, period. The Trump administration's argument is this: when the amendment says subject to the jurisdiction thereof, it means something more than just being physically present and subject to its laws. They're saying it requires allegiance. If your parents are here temporarily or illegally, you don't have that allegiance, and therefore you're not a citizen, even if you're born here. But here's the problem. If we go down that road, we're not just rewriting one line of the Constitution. We're rewriting what it means to be American. We're saying citizenship isn't about where you're born anymore. It's about who your parents are, their legal status, whether they came here the right way. That fundamentally changes American identity. The timing is fascinating. Trump didn't just wake up and decide to tackle this. It's been a long-term goal. But making it his first executive order on day one tells you about priorities. Not the economy, not health care, not infrastructure. His very first move was stripping citizenship from babies born to immigrant parents. This is about sending a message, showing his base he's willing to blow up constitutional norms to deliver campaign promises. Trump's core supporters love this. They see it as getting tough on immigration, closing what they perceive as a loophole, encouraging people to come here illegally just to have babies who automatically become citizens. They call it birth tourism. But what happens when you create a permanent underclass of people born in America who aren't American? What happens to those kids? Where do they go? What rights do they have? Do they get to go to school, emergency medical care? Can they ever become citizens, or are they stuck in legal purgatory forever? The ACLU is representing the plaintiffs. Cecilia Wang, their national legal director, said, "No president can change the 14th Amendment's fundamental promise of citizenship. For over 150 years, it has been the law that everyone born on U.S. soil is a citizen." She's right. This is bedrock constitutional law that doesn't change because a president doesn't like it. But here's where Trump might have a point, and I'll be honest with you. There are legitimate questions about birthright citizenship scope that reasonable people can disagree about. What about children of tourists who give birth here, then return home? Are they really subject to U.S. jurisdiction in any meaningful sense? What about children of foreign diplomats who are explicitly exempt because diplomats have immunity and aren't fully subject to U.S. law? Where do we draw these lines? The problem is Trump's executive order doesn't draw careful lines. It takes a sledgehammer to the whole concept. It says if your parents are here temporarily on a visa, even a legal visa, or if they're undocumented, your birth on American soil doesn't count. That's not nuance. That's wholesale rewriting of constitutional doctrine through executive fiat. One man with a pen trying to undo 127 years of settled law. Now let me tell you about another Supreme Court decision that just came down. The court unanimously ruled in favor of Catholic Charities Wisconsin, saying the state violated the First Amendment by denying them a religious tax exemption. You might be thinking, what does this have to do with Trump and immigration? On the surface, nothing. But if you look deeper, it tells you something important about how this Supreme Court thinks about constitutional rights and religious freedom. Catholic Charities of the Diocese of Superior operates programs serving people with disabilities. They're controlled by the Catholic Church and say their mission is carrying out church teachings by serving the poor and vulnerable. They applied for a religious exemption from Wisconsin's unemployment tax, which the state provides to organizations operated primarily for religious purposes. Wisconsin said no. Why? Because Catholic Charities serves everyone. They hire non-Catholics. They don't try to convert people they help. They don't hand out Bibles or require mass attendance to receive services. Wisconsin looked at this and said it's charitable work, but not religious enough for the exemption. The Wisconsin Supreme Court agreed, but the U.S. Supreme Court saw it completely differently in a 9-0 decision. Justice Sonia Sotomayor wrote the opinion, saying when government distinguishes between religions based on theological practices, like whether they proselytize or only serve members, that violates the First Amendment. Government must be neutral between religions. It can't favor religions that evangelize over those that serve quietly, or religions helping only their own over those helping everyone, regardless of faith. Think about what Wisconsin was essentially saying. If you want a religious tax exemption, you need to act like our idea of religious. You need to preach, convert, limit services to believers. But that's not how Catholicism works, at least not Catholic social teaching. The court said Wisconsin was wrong to impose its own definition of religious behavior on a religious organization. This connects to the bigger picture. This court, with its conservative majority, is very protective of religious freedom claims. When religious organizations say government is interfering with religious practice, this court tends to side with them. We've seen it repeatedly in recent years. Religious liberty claims are winning at rates we haven't seen in decades. Here's the million-dollar question. Does that same principle apply to birthright citizenship? Will the Supreme Court be as protective of constitutional text and long-standing precedent in the citizenship case as they were with Catholic Charities? Or will they find some way to give Trump what he wants? Let's be honest. If this court wanted to rule in Trump's favor, they could probably find a way. They could say, subject to the jurisdiction thereof means something other than what it's meant for a century. They could narrow Wong Kim Ark or distinguish it. Legal scholars can be creative when reaching particular outcomes. But should they? That's the real question. Should the Supreme Court overturn more than a century of settled law fundamental to American identity, just because the president asked them to? Even if 6 justices personally agree with Trump's immigration policy, do they have the institutional integrity to say, sorry, Mr. President, the Constitution means what it says, and you can't change it with an executive order? There's a line in Justice Sotomayor's Catholic Charities opinion that stuck with me. She wrote, "It is fundamental to our constitutional order that the government maintain neutrality between religion and religion. There may be hard calls to make in policing that rule, but this is not one. Did you catch that? She's saying some constitutional questions are difficult, but this one isn't. This one is clear. The government violated the First Amendment, period. I wonder if she'll feel the same about birthright citizenship. I wonder if she'll say there may be hard calls about immigration policy, but this isn't one. The 14th Amendment is clear. Something tells me she will, but she's not who Trump needs to convince. He needs 5 votes. He probably has Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito. They tend to side with executive power under Republican presidents. He might have Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. Then there's Chief Justice John Roberts, who seems to care deeply about the court's institutional reputation and might not want to be the Chief Justice who presided over rewriting American citizenship law. This is going to be fascinating to watch and potentially catastrophic depending how it goes, because here's what's really at stake. If Trump wins, we're not just changing who gets to be a citizen. We're changing the relationship between the executive branch and the Constitution. We're saying a president can look at constitutional text understood one way for generations and say, actually, I think it means something else, and the court will back him up. That's a massive expansion of presidential power, setting precedent far beyond immigration. What's next? Could a future president decide the Second Amendment doesn't protect individual gun rights, only state militias, despite what the Supreme Court has said? Could a president decide the First Amendment's freedom of press doesn't apply to online media, only traditional newspapers? Once you open the door to presidents reinterpreting fundamental constitutional provisions to suit policy preferences, where does it end? Let's talk about practical implications, because this isn't just abstract constitutional theory. We're talking about real people's lives. There are families right now, American families, terrified their children might not be considered citizens. Pregnant women are wondering what legal status their babies will have when born. People who have lived entire lives thinking they were American citizens might suddenly find themselves in legal limbo. This isn't a game or political theater. This is people's lives, identities, futures. You know what really gets me about the hypocrisy? Trump and his supporters love talking about respecting the Constitution, being originalists who interpret it how the founders intended. But when it comes to birthright citizenship, all that originalism disappears. The 14th Amendment was passed in 1868 specifically to ensure everyone born in the United States, regardless of parents' status, was a citizen. That was the whole point. A direct response to the Dred Scott decision saying black people couldn't be citizens. The 14th Amendment said once and for all, if you're born here, you're American, period. So where's the originalism now? Where's the respect for constitutional text? It's nowhere, because this isn't really about constitutional interpretation. It's about policy preference dressed up in constitutional language. Trump wants to crack down on immigration, and he's willing to bend, twist, or break the Constitution to do it. The question is whether the Supreme Court will let him. Now, I want to talk about something else that ties into all this. Earlier this year, the court made a big ruling about universal injunctions, or nationwide injunctions, orders a single federal judge can issue stopping a law or policy from being enforced anywhere in the country, not just in that judge's district. Trump hated these during his first term because liberal judges would issue nationwide injunctions blocking his policies. His lawyers asked the Supreme Court to limit them, and the court did in a 6-3 decision. The conservative majority said federal judges generally can't issue these sweeping nationwide orders. They can protect specific plaintiffs before them, but can't issue blanket prohibitions applying everywhere. On one level, this makes legal sense. Why should one judge in Hawaii or Washington dictate policy for the entire country? But on another level, it's a massive win for executive power, especially when the executive pushes constitutional boundaries. Here's why this matters for birthright citizenship. When Trump first issued his executive order, multiple federal judges blocked it with nationwide injunctions, saying it's unconstitutional everywhere until courts fully reviewed it. But now, with the Supreme Court's new ruling, those blanket protections are gone. Judges can only protect specific plaintiffs in their courtroom. So Trump's order might be blocked for some people, but not others. You could have children of immigrant parents in California protected by court order, but children of immigrant parents in Texas aren't. Same Constitution, same executive order, different results. depending on where you live. Does that sound like equal protection under the law? It sure doesn't to me. It's exactly the chaos that happens when you chip away at long-standing legal doctrine for political expediency. This Supreme Court has been expanding executive power and limiting courts' ability to check that power. They gave Trump broad immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts. They limited regulatory agencies' ability to act. They restricted nationwide injunctions. A pattern is emerging. You know what else bothers me? The speed. Trump signed this executive order on day one. Courts blocked it. Trump's lawyers immediately raced to the Supreme Court. Now, months later, we're about to have a definitive ruling on something that could reshape American citizenship for generations. That's too fast. Constitutional questions of this magnitude usually take years to work through the system. There's a reason for that. Courts need time to fully consider implications, hear from all sides, think through consequences. But Trump doesn't want time. He wants results. He wants to point to his base and say, look, I did it. I ended birthright citizenship like I promised. And the Supreme Court, by agreeing to take this case so quickly and promising a decision by June's end, is playing along. They could have let lower courts continue working through the issue. They could have waited another year or two, but they didn't. They grabbed this case and put it on the express track. Maybe they want to settle the issue once and for all. Maybe they'll come down hard in favor of birthright citizenship and tell Trump he can't do this. That's possible. But I've got to tell you, I'm skeptical. This court has shown repeatedly that when push comes to shove between constitutional principle and political outcome, they're willing to find ways to reach the political outcome they want. Let me bring this back to something practical affecting real people, because I don't want this to be just abstract legal analysis. There are communities across this country absolutely terrified right now. Immigrant communities, mixed status families, where some members are citizens and others aren't, people who came here legally but temporarily. All these folks are watching this case and wondering what it means for them. And you know what? They should be terrified, because if Trump gets his way, we're talking about fundamental redefinition of who belongs in America. Think about it from a kid's perspective. You're born in a hospital in Los Angeles, New York, or Miami. You take your first breath on American soil. Your parents might not have papers, or they might be here on a student or work visa. Under current law, you're an American citizen. You grow up here, go to school here, pledge allegiance to the flag. You're American in every sense that matters. But under Trump's order, you're not. You're something else, something less. You're here, but you don't belong. You're in America, but you're not American. What does that do to a kid? What does it do to their sense of identity, belonging? And what does it do to American society when we have millions of people who are here but don't have citizenship, don't have full legal rights, exist in this gray zone between citizen and foreigner? That's not a recipe for success. That's a recipe for a permanent underclass, for division, for resentment on all sides. And here's what really kills me about all this. It's completely unnecessary. We have immigration problems in this country. The system is broken, sure. But birthright citizenship isn't the problem. In fact, it's one of the things that has made America strong. It's one reason we've successfully integrated wave after wave of immigrants over centuries, because we said to their children, you're American, full stop, no asterisks, no conditions, no second-class citizenship. You're one of us. That's powerful. That's the promise that has made America different from many other countries. In many parts of the world, citizenship is about blood, ethnicity, whether your ancestors came from the right place. But America has always said citizenship is about where you're born and what you choose to become. It's about commitment to democratic values, not about who your parents were or where they came from. That's what makes us Americans, not just another tribe fighting over territory. And Trump wants to throw that away. He wants to say American citizenship is conditional, that it depends on your parents' immigration status, on whether they came here the right way. And if the Supreme Court lets him do it, we'll have fundamentally changed what it means to be American. We'll have said the American dream, the idea that anyone can come here and their children can be full Americans, is over. Finished. It was nice while it lasted, but we don't do that anymore. I don't know about you, but that breaks my heart. Because for all of America's flaws, and Lord knows we've got plenty, that idea of birthright citizenship has been one of our better angels. It's been one of the things we got right. And to see it potentially thrown away because of anti-immigrant animus dressed up in constitutional language is tough to watch. So what happens next? The Supreme Court will hear oral arguments sometime in spring. Both sides will make their case. Trump's lawyers will argue the 14th Amendment doesn't mean what we've thought for over a century. The lawyers defending birthright citizenship will argue the text is clear, the precedent is settled, and the president doesn't have power to change constitutional meaning by executive order. Then probably in late June, right at the end of the court's term, we'll get a decision. If I'm a betting man, and I'm not really, but let's pretend, I'd say we'll see a 6-3 or maybe 5-4 decision. The conservative justices will face a real choice. Do they rule based on what the Constitution actually says? Or do they rule based on what they think would be good policy? Do they follow precedent and the plain text of the 14th Amendment? Or do they find some creative way to give Trump what he wants? I hope they'll do the right thing. I hope they'll say, Mr. President, we understand your concerns about immigration, but this isn't the way to address them. The Constitution means what it says. Birthright citizenship is the law of the land. If you want to change it, you need to amend the Constitution, not issue an executive order. That's what they should say. Whether they will is another question entirely. And that brings me back to the Catholic Charities decision because I think it's instructive. When the court ruled unanimously in that case, they were sending a message about religious freedom and constitutional rights. They were saying government doesn't get to define what counts as religious behavior. Religious organizations get to make those decisions based on their own theological understanding. That's a strong statement about respecting constitutional protections and not letting government second-guess fundamental rights. Will they apply that same principle to birthright citizenship? Will they say the 14th Amendment means what it says and government doesn't get to redefine it based on current policy preferences? Or will they find a way to distinguish the two cases, to say religious freedom deserves strong protection, but birthright citizenship is somehow different, somehow more flexible? That's the question that keeps me up at night. Because if this court is willing to let Trump rewrite the 14th Amendment, what's to stop the next president from rewriting other parts of the Constitution? Once you open that Pandora's box, once you say presidents can reinterpret fundamental constitutional provisions to suit their policy goals, you've fundamentally altered the balance of our system. And maybe that's what Trump wants. Maybe that's been the goal all along, not just to crack down on immigration, but to establish a precedent that presidents have power to reinterpret the Constitution as they see fit. Because if he wins this case, that's exactly what he'll have done. He'll have established that the executive branch can look at clear constitutional text, at settled precedent, at generations of understanding and say, we're doing it differently now. And the Supreme Court will have said, okay, that's fine. That's not the America I believe in. It's not the system of checks and balances I learned about in school. That's something else entirely. Something that looks more like executive supremacy than constitutional democracy. And if we go down that road, I'm not sure how we come back. So that's where we are. The Supreme Court is about to decide something that will echo through American history for generations. They're going to tell us who gets to be American, what the Constitution really means, and how much power presidents have to reshape fundamental rights. It's one of the biggest cases in decades, and the stakes couldn't be higher. As for me, I'll be watching closely when those oral arguments happen in spring. I'll be paying attention to the questions the justices ask, the arguments the lawyers make, the constitutional principles that get invoked. And then when that decision comes down in June, we'll all find out together whether the Supreme Court is an independent check on executive power or whether it's become a tool to use in pursuit of political goals.